Kalimera, and welcome to Stupid Ancient History, Stupid A-Level Greeks. As is typical in Manchester during the summer, it's raining, I'm wearing a toga, and today we're going to have a brief introduction, a quick look at Greece in 500 BC. So, welcome to Greece. There it is. It's geography time, so get your colouring pencils out. The first thing we need to know before we start looking at what these crazy Greeks get up to for the century is where everything is. And the bad news is Greece is not a straightforward place to be able to think about. There's lots going on. It's quite bumpy and knobbly and lumpy. But if you can sort of remember where the key regions are and where the key things are, you'll do fine. But it is really important to understand where things are. So, if you can see, as you'll see, there's a lovely, not all copied off the internet map, with some not all shoddily put on numbers. So these numbers represent the main kind of regions and areas of Greece that we need to be aware of. So if we start at the bottom, number one, this peninsula, this lumpy bit sticking out at the bottom, this is called the Peloponnese. This is kind of one of the most arid parts of Greece. Even today it's one of the poorest parts of Greece. But it's separated from the main body of Greece by what's number two. This is the Isthmus of Corinth. You will get used to the word isthmus quite a lot. You will come across it a lot. An isthmus is literally just a very narrow piece of land surrounded by water, basically like a bridge. The Isthmus of Corinth, which is number two on your map, is super duper important during our period that we're studying, because this is kind of the cut-off point. The Peloponnesians think of themselves differently to the rest of the Greeks. They are effectively, they sound different, they do things differently. They are southerners compared to the rest of the Greeks. And this Isthmus of Corinth acts as the physical boundary, as well as a kind of identity boundary between the two regions. Moving up from the Isthmus of Corinth, you've got this first sticky out bit, number three. This is Attica. This is obviously where you'll find Athens. Attica is quite a prominent region in Greece. It's quite wealthy. It's got lots of natural resources. It's not terribly fertile. It also has really good access to the Aegean Sea, which is important. Just next to that then, as we move slightly further west, we've got Boeotia. Again, this is a mountainous, very hilly part of Greece. Most of Greece ultimately is very, very hilly. There's not a lot of flat land. Lots of mountains, lots of hills, lots of bumpy bits. So Boeotia, again, mountainous, hilly, very, very fertile in terms of grazing land on the sides of hills, not so much for flat land, but the sides of hills. Also lots and lots of mineral deposits. It's in Boeotia, just next to Boeotia, where we see Delphi, which is a really important site, and we'll come to that later. Just sticking out above Boeotia and Attica, you've got this little island, number five. This is Euboea. Euboea is, again, part of Greece. It's not physically joined. You can actually get between the two. Euboea almost acts a bit like a garden for Boeotia and Attica. Euboea is relatively fertile in comparison. There's a lot of agriculture going on there, and it is important to cities like Athens. The Athenians rely heavily on them for fruits, vegetables, food. Moving further north, we get to number six, which we've literally just called the North. The further north you get in Greece, the less Greek the Greeks consider it. So everything up from Larissa up into Macedonia, Epirus, Thrace and so on, this is just known as the North. The Greeks consider it a bit wild. It's got lots and lots of natural resources. It's now modern day Macedonia, Albania, Bulgaria, northern Greece. But it's almost kind of getting towards the edge of the map for the Greeks. It's kind of full of bearded people who drink a lot and fight a lot and cause them bother. So moving back further south into safe territory almost, On number 7, as you can see, we've got the Cyclades, the Cycladean Islands. Now, they're not massive, there's not many of them. Well, there are lots of them. They're not massive players in this, but they are really, really important because the Cyclades act as kind of stepping stones across the Aegean Sea. So whoever controls the Cyclades effectively controls trade. And they stand in the middle of this body of water that's really important to the course. And finally, over in the east, we've got the Ionian coast. These are the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor, part of the Persian Empire, and they kind of frame the Greek world to the east. So there's your basic geography. You will need to get used to this. You will need to know where places are. It's always a good idea to keep this in your mind at any one time. So now we've just gone through the basic geography of Greece, where everything is. We now need to start looking at the people who lived there, the Greeks. And as we said before, and as you could have seen from the map, Greece is divided not into one nation, as it were, at all. It's completely disunified, but lots and lots of rival little city-states, each with their own ideas, each with their own ways of doing things, and each with their own important role to play in the upcoming century. Again, the problem with Greek history is it can get confusing. There are as many city-states as there are little islands, and I think the best way to think about each of these city-states is to try and personify each one. Think about the character and who they are, as well as the geography. So we're going to go through one by one, look at some of the key players. We're not looking at all the city-states, but some of the key players. So let's start with everyone's favourite nut jobs in the south, and that is Sparta. Sparta are, without a doubt, the most unusual of the Greek city-states. They are not normal. Even the Greeks thought they were a bit odd. They thought they were really, really odd. They have a very, very strange social structure. They are an incredibly militaristic society. Their entire city, their entire society is based around a military camp. So rather than a city, it's a military camp. The army is absolutely everything to Sparta, which is unusual as well because they have, of all of these city-states we're going to look at, they arguably have the smallest population. And this is in part because they also practice this very ancient, bizarre form of eugenics, where they want all Spartan males particularly to be 100% awesome, strong, burly, tough, to the point where, yes, weak babies allegedly are chucked off the top of a mountain. Something called the apothete. I told you the Spartans were strange. They are. They are a city-state of nut jobs. But again, they are very, very militaristic, and they're actually seen as the main military power in Greece at this time. This is largely because they are the hegemon of what's called the Peloponnesian League. The Peloponnesian League is basically like a political alliance or a massive gang where Sparta has rounded up lots of other city-states and they've formed this alliance. They did this through what they called the campaign against tyrants, but in reality involved the Spartan army stomping around the Peloponnese and replacing governments in places like Corinth and Elis and Olympus, and all throughout Arcadia, with governments that are friendly to the Spartans. The Spartans have two kings and rulers and oligarchy, so they're not big fans of democracy. So this Peloponnesian League is this collection of city-states in the Peloponnese who are allied to Sparta, and they ultimately have to do what Sparta say. This does not include, however, Argos in this bit, in Argolis, and Achaia. So not everyone in the Peloponnese is in the Peloponnesian League, and if you're not in it, you should be a little worried because the Spartans are not too keen on you. Of note is on this map, obviously, Messenia. Messenia is very, very different. Messenia is full of people called helots. These are basically Greek slaves. The Spartans enslaved the entirety of Messenia centuries before our period and used them as slaves. Other Greeks do not like this. They think this is a bit wrong. They're quite happy with the idea of slavery, but they don't like an entire Greek population being enslaved. Enslaving people from elsewhere, that is fine. Enslaving prisoners of war, not a problem. Just taking over a big chunk of your neighbour's land and enslaving them, not cool apparently. So the Helots are basically doing all of Sparta's work. The Spartans are desperately worried about the Helots because this is what they rely on so much, so they keep a very close eye on them. Partly because of this worry about the Helots, and partly because, well, they don't like boats, the Spartans are incredibly isolationist and they're incredibly introverted. They're very secretive, very private. They don't write things down, which doesn't help us as historians. They don't like outsiders. They don't really like visitors. And ultimately, if we look at the top where Corinth is, the Isthmus of Corinth, that's the top of the Spartan world. They're really not that fussed about stuff that happens outside of the Peloponnese. If it happens outside of the Peloponnese and it stays there, that's fine. Athens can burn, Greece can burn. They're not that bothered as long as the Peloponnese is secure. So that's Sparta. There they are in the region of Laconia, right at the bottom. World-class Fruit Loops. So if Sparta, your kind of psychotic gym lads, are the traditional power in Greece, the biggest military power, then Athens are the new hot rivals. These are the up-and-coming state, and they could not be more different to Sparta. Athens is a fastly growing, vibrant city. It's wealthy, it thrives on intellect, it thrives on the pursuits of the mind, whereas the Spartans are very, very about the body. Athens is a growing, massive naval power, arguably the biggest naval power in Greece at the time. They have mastered the sea. They have a growing navy, which they think the idea is that they can use this to spread their wings, spread their territories, spread their influence, especially, as we can see, throughout the Aegean, where naval power is really important. Athens sits on the edge of Attica. The city is a few miles away from the harbour of Piraeus, but again, the harbour is really important as the city. Attica is really rich in kind of mineral wealth. It's got lots of silver mines, an awful lot of marble, so lots of kind of resources that they can use, they can build with, they more importantly can trade with. But it's not a hugely fertile part of Greece. It's a bit barren, it's a bit arid, it's very, very rocky, largely because of all this bedrock that's going on there. As we've said before, Athens is kind of the mind of Greece, or they like to see it as the mind of Greece. They are keen to push things like drama, philosophy, all of the kind of big names in the arts world and philosophy. They ultimately go to Athens because the Athenians welcome them with open arms. Athens as well is the seat of democracy. They established democracy. They are pushing for democracy. Other Greek states who are maybe not too keen with their established kings, they look to Athens as kind of the next step. So the Athenians are seen as a bit radical, these radical democrats in Athens. Like I said, Athens in 500 is a rising star. They've gone through the democratic revolution. They've started to kind of wheedle out what they saw as the old corruption of the old oligarchs, and they are now keen to do something else. Athens is growing in population, in wealth and influence, and they're keen to spread that influence throughout the Greek world, making them a bit of a rival to Sparta, who have already secured their little gang of mates. Again, like I said, the Athenians are massive into their trade across the sea, particularly with the Ionian States, far up into the north to the Black Sea, because they have the resources to sell to these people, the marble, the silver and so on, but also the means to do this. And the more ships they send out, the more places they trade with and they have links with, the more they get the idea that they quite like that. That looks pretty fancy over there, and it'd be good if the Athenians could acquire these strategic lands. So Athens is definitely one to watch in this century. So next in our Who's Who in ancient Greece is the city-state of Corinth. Corinth is a key member of Sparta's Peloponnesian League. They are long-term allies with Sparta, and these seem to have semi-preferential treatment within the Peloponnesian League, partly because they are so strategically important. They mark off the end of the Peloponnese. They guard, if you will, the Isthmus of Corinth, that narrow land bridge that Sparta is so obsessed with. They're able to do this because in the city of Corinth there is a huge mountain with a fortification on top, so they can literally see any enemies coming from far away. Interestingly though, because of their position, their access to both the Aegean and the Ionian Sea on the west, Corinth are something of a growing or an established naval power. They're effectively the naval power of the Peloponnesian League, and effectively Sparta's almost second in command. It's not official, but you need to think about them that way. They have a lot of sway with Sparta, even if they don't have any direct power over them. As we've said before, they are an important naval power, and like Athens, this leads to their idea about expansionism. Corinth is a growing city, it's a popular city, it's getting a bit crowded, so they've historically been very keen at sending settlers off on their boats across the known world to establish new colonies. So Corinth sees themselves as a growing power in much the same way as Athens. They're growing in terms of naval strength, but also external influence. This is obviously going to bring them into conflict with Athens, and it's no surprise that the Corinthians absolutely hate the Athenians, because they are quite close geographically, but also they have to share the same waterways, the same sea lanes, and they don't like doing this. So Corinth is always going to butt heads with Athens because they're scrapping over the same bit of land. Fun fact about Corinth, Corinth have some sacred prostitutes who live at the top of this citadel that we talked about before, and apparently Corinthian women are the most beautiful in all of Greece, and travellers would travel from all over to come to Corinth to spend time with these sacred prostitutes, doing what you do in a temple with a sacred prostitute. Next up is Argos, not the shop, the city-state. Argos are notoriously, I don't want to use the word neutral, but neutral. They're not intentionally neutral, they're just not bothered about anybody else. They are unusual in that they're effectively trapped within the Peloponnese, surrounded by members of the Peloponnesian League, and as a result of this, they hate Sparta. They do not like the Peloponnesian League at all. They feel threatened by them, they feel surrounded by them, they feel trapped by them. So again, what you'll find within Greece, the closer you are to someone, the more likely you are to come into conflict with them over borders, farmland, or so on. Argos is a good example of this. Now, just because they hate Sparta does not mean they are friends with anyone else. They are not. They are quite isolationist in terms of their political views. They don't like to get involved in other people's business, but they are also very, very wealthy traders. Apparently, the people from Argos, the Argives, brought coins as an idea to Greece. So they're pretty good with trade. They are on the coast, they've got a strong trading merchant navy, they're doing very well for themselves, and through this financial independence, the fact that the city is growing and their ability to pay for mercenaries largely, they are able to fend off the interests of Sparta and the Peloponnesian League. Fun fact about Argos, they are very good or very keen on the arts. Lots of famous sculptors are brought to Argos, or they come to Argos because they will pay for them. There's a huge theatre built in Argos, so the arts are massive, as is trade, and generally not getting involved in other people's grief. Heading north then, we come to Thebes, not the Egyptian Thebes, the Greek Thebes. Sadly, Thebes is no longer there anymore. A certain chap from Macedonia called Alexander saw to that by burning it to the ground. But in the 5th century, before he comes along and destroys it, Thebes is quite an important city. It's apparently the legendary home of Oedipus, the guy who liked his mum a bit too much, and the griffin who sets him the great riddle, but really forgot to tell him about the whole sleeping with your mum bit. So Thebes is quite a traditional city. Even in 500, it's ruled traditionally by a king, which again brings it into immediate conflict with Athens. The region around Thebes is quite fertile, but again very, very hilly, very, very mountainous. In these mountains, though, there's an awful lot of iron. So there's a huge number of mines in and around Thebes. It's quite a minerally rich region, and Thebes as a result becomes very, very wealthy. One thing everyone wants is iron. That's what you make your weapons from, or certainly the pointy bits of your weapons. Thebes has got this all over the shop, so Thebes is kind of key. It's also important strategically because it kind of acts as a barrier between Attica and the north. So if you want to go from Athens further north, you've effectively got to go through Theban territory and Thebes. Now, because of their proximity, because of their different political views, and because they just don't like them, the Thebans hate Athens. Again, similar to Argos, this does not mean they are immediate allies of Sparta or immediate friends of Sparta, but certainly if you had to pick a side of the two, and spoilers, they do, they are much closer to Sparta ideologically in terms of their rule, in terms of how they think about things, and also by the fact that it's just not Athens. The Thebans are more akin and more allied to Sparta. They're a really good example of this old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That pretty much sums up the Greeks. They will side with anyone who is willing to help them out against someone they hate. Fun fact about Thebes, as well as Oedipus, Thebes is famous for what's called the Sacred Band of Thebans. This is a group of male lovers who form this apparently ultimate fighting force, this undefeatable phalanx of soldiers. They almost take a kind of monastic approach to what they do. They're not interested in talking to anyone else, but they are certainly a military force to be reckoned with. The Sacred Band of Thebans. And moving north from Thebes, we come to what I've imaginatively called the north. This is Thessaly, Macedonia, Thrace, and the island of Thasos. Now, I've clumped all of these guys together because the southern Greeks don't really worry about these guys too much. They clump it in as the north. They're regarded as a bit wild by the southern Greeks. They're not very cultured. The Spartans just think they're far away, so they're not interested. So these northern Greeks, they are very, very separated from southern Greece. They look different as well. They do not look necessarily traditionally Greek. The climate is a lot cooler. The land is a lot flatter. They speak Greek, but that's roughly it. So they're regarded as wild and barbarous by the southern Greeks. And in turn, the northern Greeks, they're not really that fussed about the southern Greeks. They're not big fans, they're not big friends. They'll have some links, they'll do some trading, but if it comes to making alliances, they're not actually that bothered. They see particularly people like the Athenians as a bit stuck up, dirty southerners. They're looking at us funny. We're not interested in them. But like I said, Thrace, Thasos, Macedonia, and Thessaly, the landscape is very, very different. Yes, it is still quite mountainous, but these parts of the world have lots and lots of valuable gold deposits, particularly gold and silver. They've got big flat plains, which is ideal for raising horses and cattle, so the diet is different in terms of fighting people like the Thessalians and the Macedonians. They are big on their cavalry, whereas in southern Greece they're really not. So they have a different way of fighting. And they've got these huge swathes of forest and wild open land, which is great because they've got a ton of resources that they can then trade or bring to bear on whoever they back in southern Greece. They do, however, have this ongoing problem in that just north of these northern Greek states are even more northerly tribes, and they are almost continued. Somewhere like Macedonia is almost continually under attack from these northern tribes, from what is now Bulgaria, Macedonia, Albania, the Balkans. So they're busy fighting their own wars against these small raiding tribes in the north to really give that much of a fuss about the southern Greeks, unless push comes to shove. In direct comparison then, if we move sort of south and easterly, we get to the Cyclades, or the Cycladean Islands. This is the scattering of islands throughout the Aegean. Each one is its own independent city-state. Now, obviously because they're quite small, they ultimately have to tie their successes or their fortunes to one of the bigger players in the world. So one of the bigger Greek states or the Persians. But the Cyclades have got something really, really important. They are pretty essential for crossing from one side of the Aegean to the other. Think of them like important stepping stones. So they grow wealthy from trade ships, because obviously they don't just let you rock up at their harbour for free. So they get wealthy from trade from one side to the other. So they're very keen on kind of stability and peace between the Greeks, the Persians, and everyone else, because no one wants to pay taxes if they're at war with each other. They become kind of an area to scrap over. Notable and amongst all of these is Delos, right in the middle. This is meant to be a sacred island. It is apparently the birthplace of Artemis and Apollo. So the Cyclades have this kind of religious sway to them as well. Then moving further east, we get to the Ionian States, including some of the larger islands, Naxos, Samos, Lesbos, and so on. So these guys are ethnically Greek. Originally, they're meant to be exiles from Athens or Attica, who, when the city got too full, they went, "No, do you know what, let's just go and see what's over there," and settled new cities. So they are ethnically Greek, they're culturally Greek, they worship Greek gods, and they've been under Persian rule for nearly 70 years. This seems to have gone wonderfully for them. The Ionian Greeks, they've benefited from being part of this Persian Empire. They have become significantly wealthy. Some of these states are possibly some of the wealthiest in the Greek world, and even within the Persian Empire. Because the thing with the Ionian States is they largely become the gateway between East and West trade. So trade between the Persian Empire and the Western world. Everything comes through them. And particularly if you look at the north of the map, you've got the Hellespont, which is this teeny tiny little crossing, this narrow bit of water between the two bodies of Asia Minor and Europe proper. And again, trade is fabulously important to these guys. They are making a lot of money. They have a pretty good relationship with the Persians. The Persians don't really interfere with them. They don't make them change the religion. They don't make them speak different languages. As long as they pay their taxes, pay their tribute, the Persians are happy. And the Ionian Greeks are quite happy because they're making a lot of money off the Persians. To further illustrate this, it's these Greek states as well who make up a significant chunk of the Persian navy. Like a lot of the Greeks, because they're so invested in travelling across the sea, they are really good sailors. So places like Samos, Lesbos and Chios, they make up a huge chunk of the Persian navy. Certainly the more elite part of the Persian navy. So all of these Greek states, they're pretty independent, they do what they do their own thing, they have their own customs and laws and so on. They're pretty much all ruled by a tyrant or single leader. It's not tyrant as in nasty guy, dictator, it's just a single leader. But they are effectively all governed by a Persian satrap who is based in Sardis. It's like a kind of regional manager to these people. The regional manager, the satrap, isn't hugely interfering. He just lets the Ionians get on with what they're doing, because why wouldn't he? As long as they don't rebel, they're making a lot of money, everything is fine, happy and dandy. Some point of note is that Herodotus, one of our main sources, he is an Ionian Greek. He's actually from the southern town called Halicarnassus. So again, when we think of the Greek world, it's not just in Greece, it's these guys as well. And finally, we get to Persia. We've saved the big guys for the end. So Persia are arguably the world's first superpower. They dwarf the Greeks in every possible aspect. They are huge, they are powerful, they are just massive. They're also referred to by the Greeks as the Medes, which is technically not true. They're not Medes, but hey ho, what are you going to do? So if you hear people referred to as the Medes or Medizers, the Medes are Persians. So the Persian Empire was founded by Cyrus the Great about a century before we take up where we're starting on. And they've grown very, very quickly throughout this previous century. They've gone from a kind of dusty backwater in northern Iran to ruling a huge chunk of the world, right from the Aegean Sea and the borders with Greece, right across to India, down into Egypt and as far as the Sahara. So they are huge. And like I said, they've coexisted with the Greeks for quite a long time. The idea is that, well, you're not bothering us, we won't bother you, that's fine. We've got our own Persian thing to be dealing with. But in 500 BC, when our story starts, it's ruled by a guy called Darius the Great. He is the king of Persia, but unfortunately he's not having the greatest time round about 500 BC. We'll get into that more. He's also got the issue that, Persia's already so big, where does he expand to next? Bit of a clue, Greece. The other thing that we should know about Persia, apart from being one of the first monotheist states in the world, because of their size, they are a massive threat to anyone who gets on the wrong side of them. Apparently, allegedly, the Persians could raise an army of millions. They are not short of men. The king's own royal bodyguard, the Immortals, there's 10,000 of them. So numbers is not something they are short of. And obviously they pose a significant threat to anyone who gets on the wrong side of them. So there you go, there's your quick whistle-stop tour of Greece in 500 BC, looking at the kind of key geography, the key areas, the key places you're going to need to know, but also a little quick who's who. Hopefully this has been useful. Leave us a comment below, and until next time, goodbye.